Gravity Falls Season 1 Episode Rankings. With Season 2 looming on the horizon, I figured it was high time to take a look back and reflect on all that has come so far and rank the Season 1 episodes from worst to best. This mostly consists of short critiques of each episode and how I would rate them in comparison. Please note that I don't believe there's been any bad episodes of Gravity Falls, but some are weaker than others. Also, this does not contain any of the shorts for rather obvious reasons. Number 20. The Deep End. This is my least favorite episode of the show thus far. One important thing to note is how it was written. This episode only had one writer, which by itself is significant as most Gravity Falls episodes had multiple writers, 2 to 3 usually, but even more than that, it was written by someone who did not write any other episodes, even partially. The writer's name is Nancy Cohen, and I couldn't find much information about her, but as far as I could tell, she was not involved in any other episodes. This episode had a few solid jokes, but overall just fell flat. The plot of the episode was just weak in general. It's a typical one-off romance plot and a little more. I understand that running theme of Mabel's summer romances not working out, but in this one, like many of the others, was just doomed from the start. I don't like it when a show focuses so much on something that you know will never go anywhere. Dipper's B-plot was just another attempt to get closer to Wendy, which, as I've stated before in previous blogs, is another weak link of the series so far. None of this is ever going to develop, so I don't see the point of focusing on it. That's the biggest problem with this episode. The plot is uninteresting. I've seen it in every other Western cartoon ever, and it combined the two elements of the series that I personally find to be the weakest. Number 19. The Inconveniencing. I found this episode rather weak for many of the same reasons. It's the first episode to truly focus on Dipper's crush on Wendy, and the start of the show's weakest subplot by a country mile. I don't mind Dipper having a casual crush on Wendy, and I actually like his rivalry with Robbie, but I hate it when it takes center stage with little to back it up. But this episode was before the whole Robbie rivalry really got started, so there wasn't any kind of interesting B-plot this time around, and the episode was almost all about Dipper's crush on Wendy. A silly, pseudo-romantic subplot that'll never amount to much of anything, and the show's tone indicates that it's self-aware of the fact that they'll never be an item, so why even bother? Some of the humor in this episode worked, but the central plot of the episode was weak, and thus the episode was weak. Number 18. Dipper versus the Manliness. Obvious moral is obvious. Since Gravity Falls is in some ways a coming-of-age story for Dipper, I can see why this episode is necessary, but it's still one of the weaker episodes. The Mabel and Grunklestrand B-plot was lacking, and Dipper's adventure here just wasn't very satisfying. We all knew the conclusion he would reach from the get-go, and it didn't deviate very much from that prediction. This is just one of those episodes with a weak plot and a foregone conclusion that makes the journey hard to enjoy. Number 17. The Legend of the Gobble. While this episode has some truly incredible lines and funny moments, the plot is just a regular recycled Scooby-Doo plot. Granted, Gravity Falls is genre-savvy enough to provide its own unique spin on it, but at the end of the day, we've all seen this before. It's also notably the only time that the supernatural phenomenon turned out to be a hoax, which I feel kinda goes against the spirit of the series. Although it does establish McGucket's inventor prowess, which becomes important later. Number 16. Bottomless Pit. This was Gravity Falls' attempt at an anthology episode, a series of shorter stories tied together by a loose narrative. That in itself isn't bad, but one of the most refreshing aspects of Gravity Falls is that it isn't broken into 11-minute half episodes like a lot of Western cartoons are. Having an anthology episode kind of breaks one of the best parts of the show, thus it goes against the spirit of things. The individual stories were fine, but 2 of them weren't canon, and there was very little contributing to the overall myth arc of the show. Number 15. Tourist Trapped. Oh, the pilot episode, the one that started it all. I would hesitate to call this episode weak, as I think I've already covered most of the episodes that I find to be weaker, but looking back, this was a rather plain way to introduce us to the show. It did a good enough job at establishing the setting and main characters, but there was only a thin plot beyond that. One weird thing about this episode was Dipper's narration. This is the only episode that is entirely narrated by Dipper, almost like an episode of Doug. I'm not sure if this inconsistency was on purpose or not, but it sure makes going back to the beginning a bit awkward. It's important to note that this is the only episode written entirely by Alex Hirsch, the creator of the show. That might explain why it feels a bit disconnected from the rest in terms of pacing and tone. Although if the Season 2 opening episode has the same kind of narration, maybe it would have been on purpose. Number 14. Land Before Swine. This episode feels different from the rest in a way that I find hard to explain. Not that that's inherently a bad thing, but it bears mentioning. I like that this episode further delved into the relationship between Mabel and Grunkle Stan. I like that it had motherfucking dinosaurs in it, and a few scenes early on were quite humorous. But as the episode went on, the humor diminished and instead became more dramatic. The drama between Mabel and Grunkle Stan is believable and has a source of origin in this episode, but the drama between Dipper and Seuss seemed a bit forced in my opinion. The episode exaggerated Seuss's clumsiness and carelessness, whereas he had proven himself to be surprisingly competent in earlier episodes. This makes the revelation at the end of the episode that, shocker, Seuss is more competent than he looks, kind of redundant. It's like the writers just needed something for Dipper and Seuss to do in this episode aside from help Mabel retrieve Waddles. This was just kind of an average episode, so it goes lower on the list. Number 13, The Submarine Trickster. I may not be a big Miyazaki fan, as many know, but I can appreciate a good no-face reference when I see one. Indeed, Jeff Bennett's creepy cameo was quite a treat. Lulz. I both like and dislike this episode. On the one hand, it's very funny, sometimes quite clever, and strengthens Dipper and Mabel's bond by the end of the episode. But on the other hand, the plot is once again caused by Dipper's dumb crush on Wendy, which as expected goes nowhere and only adds tension between him and Mabel. This is another episode where Dipper does something selfish and dumb and has to work out to undo the damage he's done. I wouldn't mind so much if all of these Dipper must make things right plots didn't revolve around Wendy. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, but having the motivation be the same all the time is a bit tiring. That being said, this was a clever Halloween-esque special, with some hilarious moments, especially involving Grunkle Stan's attempts to scare trick-or-treaters. The opening scene of the Pines family in the store is also one of the best opening scenes in the series. It showed the casual family bond they share and how they are from day to day, which was a nice touch. Number 12, Boss Mabel. This episode had a lot of clever things going on in it. I liked Dipper realizing that ordinary people aren't quite ready to deal with real monsters. I liked Mabel's carefree attitude being challenged with the stress of running a business, even if it was simplified greatly in a cartoony way. The humor was spot on in this episode, and it taught a valuable lesson that sometimes you need to be a bit of a hard ass to get things done. Grunkle Stan's scene stole the show in this episode, providing some of his best lines. Old man powers indeed. Number 11, Headhunters. This was the first episode of the series that showcased the twins working together as a team to solve a mystery, which in my opinion is the main draw of the show, and a murder mystery no less, kind of. Any episode that features Dipper and Mabel working together and developing off of one another is one of the better episodes in my mind. The varying dynamics at play between them combined with a stronger character focus than most Western shows allows for more quality storytelling. The twist was decent, the explanation was kind of hilarious, and being the third episode in the show, it truly showed what kinds of great things we could expect from it. Number 10, The Hand That Rocks the Mabel. This episode introduced us to a resident villain, Little Gideon, and I love everything about this character. His temper, his cunning, his manipulation, his suave mask of cheerfulness and innocence, and the excellent vocal performance by Thurp Van Orman, previously known as Flapjack in The Misadventures of Flapjack. This episode has it all. It had an enjoyable main plot, continued to expand the setting and cast, gave us a great recurring villain, it progressed the myth arc of the show, and was funny to boot. After episode 3, this episode kept proving how good the series could be. This was the episode that really sold me on Gravity Falls, so it deserves respect for that alone. Number 9, Boys Crazy. This episode was clever and heartfelt. It had a nice plot development on the whole Dipper Wendy Robbie side of things, and had some decent character progression for Mabel on the other side of things. It was hilarious when it wanted to be, and the pacing never skipped a beat. I even sort of enjoyed Mabel's friends in this episode, which is weird as I usually find them to be kind of bland if not sometimes annoying. The boy band clones were great, seeing Uncle Stan and Dipper working together was great, everything was great, a solid episode of a great series. Number 8, Gideon Rises. The season finale, yes. It was quite good, but not as great as it could have been. I love the seriousness of the situation. I love the Pines family's desperation. I love the solemnness in Grunkle Stan's voice as he has to send the twins back home. Gideon was threatening, having the whole town under his thumb. The tension was great, the arc progression was great, and the final battle with Gideon was surprisingly awesome. But there's a few things that rubbed me the wrong way. The first being is that they had to constantly remind the audience about Mabel's grappling hook. You know, the one from the first episode. It made its nature as a Chekhov's gun so obvious that it hurt. My intelligence felt insulted that they brought it up 2 or 3 times in this episode before it became useful right at the end. They could have at least been more subtle about it. The second issue was Gideon's claim that Dipper was powerless without his journal. Looking back, this is astonishingly untrue. Many episodes feature Dipper solving problems without any assistance from the book. but this episode pretends like he can't do jack without it. It would make sense for Gideon to assume that Dipper's victories were due to the book, but Dipper himself should have known better. He basically only got lost in despair because the writers wanted him to for the season finale, not because it made much sense. But otherwise, this was a solid season finale. Number 7, Fight Fighters. Excellent pixel art animation on Rumble. A lot of respect to classic fighting games was given here. Someone on the team is a big Street Fighter fan and it showed. It's a typical avoid a bully fight plot, but it worked rather well here. The humor was spot on, the drama was believable, Dipper's arc was well executed, and even Mabel's B-plot had a lot of great laughs. I may not typically like episodes that revolve around Dipper's crush on Wendy, but since this one focused more on his rivalry with Robbie, it was more tolerable. Another solid episode. Number 6, Irrational Treasure. Another excellent episode featuring the twins working together to uncover a conspiracy. This is what Gravity Falls is really all about. President Tremblay is basically a walking meme factory, and Mabel's character arc was very heartfelt here. I especially liked the last touching moment of Dipper getting revenge on Pacifica for Mabel's sake, even though she didn't want it anymore. What a great brother. The conspiracy was engaging, the myth arc progressed a lot, Mabel had a strong character arc, and the twins were working together to solve a mystery. It's everything that makes Gravity Falls awesome. Number 5, Dreamscape Errors. Finally, we get to meet the mysterious Bill Cipher, and he did not disappoint. This was the darkest episode of Gravity Falls, and it was executed very, very well. So many secrets to decode here, and a great progression of Dipper's relationship with Grunkle Stan, and indeed a better understanding of Grunkle Stan's very character. The humor was great, but it wasn't the focus this time. The imagery was fantastic, the plot was engaging, the mysteries deepened, and had one hell of a cliffhanger. One of the best episodes. Number 4, Double Dipper. I love the subversion of many clone tropes here. I love the clones being a metaphor for Dipper's excessive planning getting in his own way. I love Mabel making both friends and enemies. I love Seuss being Seuss. I love everything about this episode. This episode was funny, clever, poignant, and impactful. Truly excellent. Number 3, Little Dipper. More awesome Gideon action, excellent drama between the twins as they work together to overcome their differences and stop Gideon's plans. Great humor and cleverness, and a nice progression of the myth arc as well. It expanded on the rivalry between Gideon and Stan, and delved a bit into Dipper and Mabel's personal history, and Seuss was cool too. Yes! Just an awesome episode all around. Number 2, The Time Traveler's Pig. This was a great episode. Dipper has to relive the same day again and again to try and get things to work in his favor, but when he finally does, it creates a conflict by taking away what Mabel wants. Time stops for no man, and we can't truly take back our mistakes. Some things are just going to go wrong, and there's nothing we can do but accept that and move on. Dipper giving up his chance at getting closer to Wendy and choosing to value Mabel's happiness and, by extension, Waddle's life, over his own, is one of the moments that made me really feel for his character. It shows how selfless and giving he can be when push comes to shove. It shows how much he cares for his sister, but most of all, it demonstrates a bit of self-awareness on his part. Deep down he knows his crush on Wendy will probably never work out, but because of how a crush works, he can't stop himself from at least trying. It's an interesting and somewhat relatable dilemma. This episode stands as having the best individual plot for a Gravity Falls episode yet. And number 1, Carpet Diem. Once again, a rather heartfelt episode. Not only does it advance the myth arc, but it also develops the twins' relationship further. They're growing apart, but deep down they don't want to. They're going through real problems that close siblings go through. There was a lot of weight to this episode in the drama department, but it also succeeded in subverting tropes of the typical body switch episode, and was hilarious at times too. I can't really think of many complaints for this episode. I just think it works perfectly the way it is and represents what's truly special about the series. It might not top a lot of people's lists, but this episode spoke to me on a more personal level and I appreciated it. The only real complaint I have is that they did not avert the voices or mental trope, and even when they switched bodies they retained their original voices, which, as science would tell you, doesn't work that way. So I award it the honor of being my personal favorite episode of Season 1 of Gravity Falls. And that's it for my episode ranking. Season 2 is coming in about a month from now. Let's hope it's every bit as great as awesome as Season 1, and still even better. Long live Gravity Falls. Quentin Tremblay for president!